Welcome everyone to the start of our 2026 webinar series. And for this webinar, well, I'll tell you first what I always do is start out by introducing Casey McKenna. Casey McKenna is a certified genetic counselor, and she's the senior program manager for education and community programs for the National Fabry Disease Foundation. Casey is going to introduce our guest speaker, Lisa Berry. And we've known Lisa for a very, very long time, and we're happy to have her with us. And so after Casey introduces Lisa, then Lisa will share her slides and provide a presentation. So welcome and thank you all for being here. Casey?
Great. Thanks, Jerry. As Jerry said, this is our kickoff to our 2026 webinar series. This time we're focusing on notable publications. So the peer-reviewed literature that the doctors and scientists on your team are reading, we wanted to break them down, make them digestible for everybody, so that we're all more aware and involved. And we are very excited to have Lisa Berry here with us today. Lisa Berry is also a certified genetic counselor within the Rare Genetic Disease Program at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. She began working with individuals and families with Fabry disease starting in 2008. And in addition to providing genetic counseling for families, she is on the Ohio Newborn Screening Advisory Council, the board of directors for the National MPS Society, and has volunteered at the NFDF's Fabry Family Conference and Camp for many years. So without further ado, welcome, Lisa.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm giving a special shout out to Jesse here, who's got his camera on. Yay. Always easier to talk to people when you can see them versus speaking into the void. So, so we're going to talk today and break down this article that actually Jerry and I are both authors on. It's called Patient Reported Experience with Fabry Disease and Its Management in the Real World Setting, Results from a Double-Blind Cross-Sectional Survey of 280 Respondents. So the first thing I wanted to let people know and make sure people are aware of is that we're going to talk through the guts of this pretty long article. It was 11 pages long and very tiny print. Um, there is there is often a what we call a plain language summary available for many different articles that are out there in the scientific literature. So it basically took our 11-page article and condensed it down and simplified the language and got it down to 2 pages. So this is a great resource for someone if you don't have a scientific background or a medical background. It can be a lot easier to digest these articles when you read it in this plain language summary. So I'm a big fan of these and definitely look for those if you are out there looking at the literature. Since I'm not sure who will ultimately watch the recordings of this, if you are new to the world of Fabry disease, it is an X-linked lysosomal storage disorder. So that means that the gene that we're going to talk about with the gene that we talk about with Fabry disease is located on the X chromosome. It's called the GLA gene, which if you have changes in that gene that are disease causing, they create a deficiency of an enzyme called alpha-Gal A, which results in the accumulation of a substance called GL3 or GB3, same thing. We know that Fabry disease can present in a severe classic form or a later onset / non-classical form. And the non-classical form actually turns out to be definitely more common than we originally thought it was and that we knew. And we learned that based on newborn screening that's now occurring in certain parts of the country and certain parts of the world. So in terms of symptoms, we know that there are symptoms of Fabry disease that you can see or feel, such as burning, tingling in the hands and feet, headaches, lack of sweating, corneal whorls, which is a finding in the eye. And then there are also symptoms that are more silent, things that you can't see or feel. And those would include problems with the heart, problems with the kidneys, and sometimes some problems with the brain. So I won't go into too much detail on that, but just in case someone's brand new to Fabry, I wanted to make sure I covered that. And then in terms of therapies, so we really at this point in time, in terms of approved therapies, I'm not going to talk about therapies that are in clinical trials or in development right now, but in terms of approved therapies, we have two different kind of ways that we can treat our patients. The first is called enzyme replacement therapy, or ERT. And there are three different drugs that are enzyme replacement therapies: Fabrazyme, Elfabrio, and Replagal. The Fabrazyme and Elfabrio are FDA approved here in the United States. Replagal is not. It is approved in Canada and many other countries, but it is not approved in the US. So if you're US based, then that is probably not something you hear too much about. And then in terms of enzyme replacement therapy, it can be used for any patient who has Fabry disease, regardless of what their genetic change is. It is administered via IV every 2 weeks as an infusion. And then it also, one of the downsides is that it can be associated with developing what we call anti-drug antibodies, or antibodies against the medicine, and infusion-related reactions, or IRRs. The other type of therapy, which is kind of, obviously the goal would be to have an oral therapy versus an IV therapy. The oral therapy is called Galafold. This is made by a company called Amicus, although they did just get taken over by BioMarin, I think it is. Yeah. So this particular therapy only works for patients who have what we call amenable pathogenic variants. These variants have to work with the medicine. So if you have a certain genetic change that works with this drug, you can take it. If you have one that doesn't work with this drug is not an option for you. It is administered once every other day, and it does require fasting for 2 hours before and 2 hours after you take the drug. And there are side effects to this medicine, although it's generally well tolerated, and most patients do not develop any sort of antibodies against the medicine. And since we're going to talk about disease monitoring as part of this paper, just a quick note to say that there are published guidelines or recommendations for how patients with Fabry disease should be monitored. So you should, as a patient, always make sure that someone is taking a look at your kidney function, your heart function, doing various scans and blood tests, and of course, assessing, how you're feeling day to day, and if you're having any pain or GI issues. All right, so getting into the paper. So the objective of this particular study was to directly assess patient perception of Fabry disease in terms of progression of disease, severity, management, as well as the patient's satisfaction with monitoring and treatment. And it involved 280 adults, so you had to be 18 or older in order to complete this survey. And you had to be located in the US or Canada to partake in this survey. We did not take people from outside those two countries. And I put a little asterisk there to remind me to tell you that when we conducted this survey, the drugs that were approved in the US were just Fabrazyme and Galafold, and then in Canada, they had just Fabrazyme, Replagal, and Galafold. At the time, Elfabrio was not approved in either of those countries. So the individuals, if someone was on Elfabrio as part of a clinical trial, they were excluded from this study, okay? And patients had to complete a 30-minute online double-blind survey. It had 5 screening questions and then 28 survey questions. So of those 280 patients, who did we get? So in terms of basic demographics, 68% were female. So we had a little bit better showing of females in this survey than males, which were 31%. In terms of age, 44% were 18 to 44 years old, and the remainder were 45 years or older. 65% of individuals reported that they had classic Fabry disease, with 18% reporting that they did not have classic Fabry disease. And then interestingly to me was 18%, 50 individuals, actually weren't sure if they had classic Fabry disease or not. So perhaps on the provider side here, maybe we should be educating our patients a little bit more about what that means. And then in terms of how long it had been since our respondents had been diagnosed, just 2% were fairly new to diagnosis, less than 1 year. And also interestingly, I thought, from my perspective, 51% of patients had been diagnosed for greater than 10 years, so for quite some time. And then in terms of treatment status, gotta move. I have my people over here covering the part of the slide. In terms of treatment status, the vast majority of individuals who took this survey were on treatment, 84%. 81% were on Fabrazyme, 8% on Repligal, and 11% were on Galafold. So I feel like we had obviously a lot on ERT and a small percentage on the oral chaperone therapy. And more men than women were on treatment, which makes sense. So in this group, our respondents were highly educated, with more than half reporting having completed a college degree or above, and 54% were employed full or part-time. All right. So getting into the results of this study. So here, can you guys see my arrow? Yes? Okay, great. So this little symbol here, that means kidney, and this one means heart. And what we did here was we asked patients about their kidney monitoring first, okay? So we wanted to know what percentage of patients were having their kidneys monitored. Usually that's a blood and urine test, at least every 12 months. So the green bar is all the respondents pooled together. So it looks good to me. 88%. Okay, you've got Fabry disease. 88% of our respondents were getting their kidneys monitored every 12 months. Then we broke it up based on orange here, which is people who are currently on treatment, blue, which is people who previously were treated but not currently receiving treatment, and then the pink is patients who were treatment naive or have never been on any treatment for their Fabry disease. And that's where things changed a little bit. So it turns out that people who are getting treatment, well, gosh, we were up to 91% for kidney monitoring, really spectacular. But if we go down in our groups, our blue and our pink, the groups who are not currently getting treatment, well, it drops into the 60s. So not getting their kidneys looked at at least every 12 months. So you can see there a difference. And what we see if we go over to the right side here is the same exact phenomenon going on with the heart. So 82% getting their heart looked at least every 12 months. And that's usually a scan, EKG, maybe a Holter monitor, maybe some blood tests, but at minimum, like an echo or a cardiac MRI, and an EKG, hopefully. So every 12 months, at least every 12 months for those on treatment was 86%. So pretty good. Could be maybe a little better, but pretty good. And then it really drops down again for the patients who are not on treatment anymore and the patients who have never been on treatment, which if you've never been on treatment, you could argue that that's probably the most important group to be monitoring, because you should really be looking and trying to determine when someone might need to go on treatment. So that was what we saw for kidneys and heart. And then we asked patients how happy they were with their monitoring. So were they satisfied with how well they were being monitored? So in this particular graph, just to orient you, darker is better. So people feel more satisfied the darker the color is. So again, we broke this out into treated, previously treated, and never been on treatment. And we saw that for patients on treatment, 87% of patients felt that their monitoring was either well, moderately well, and or excellent. And just 3% felt that they were not being monitored well at all. And then if you go into the other two groups who are not on treatment, we see less satisfaction with monitoring. Okay. And then we specifically asked about antibody testing. So the first thing, here we go. So we asked people, have you been monitored? Have you had antibody testing? So if you're on enzyme replacement therapy, you should be getting an antibody test. And 22% of patients reported not being tested. 36% of patients reported that they were tested. And then, sorry, I really need to figure out where to put you guys. Okay, there we go. 42% of patients reported they were not sure. They weren't sure if they got tested for that. And then of those 36%, if you go back to the blue here in the center, 36% of patients who did remember being tested, only 31% of those patients were actually aware of their or 31%, sorry, were unaware of what their test results were. So 36% of patients were tested, but a third of them didn't know what their results were. So that as a provider was interesting to me, though from a patient perspective, I can see how that happens. There's a lot of different test results coming at you, and it's hard to keep track of them all, I'm sure. Okay. So then we asked about disease burden. We asked patients to rank like how severe their Fabry disease symptoms were. So they could have said difficult to control, bothersome, or mild to moderate. So about half fell in that mild to moderate category. 38% reported that their symptoms were bothersome. And then 14% of those 280 individuals said that their symptoms were difficult to control, unfortunately. And then 82% of patients stated that they thought that their disease was worsening in spite of stable laboratory tests and clinical assessments. So that was also, as a provider, also an interesting perspective to hear from the patients. Okay, so then we asked questions about quality of life. So one, and affects the burden of enzyme replacement therapy on your quality of life as well. So that's what QOL stands for, is quality of life. So we did ask about infusion duration. So it's pretty variable. So you have in pink the patients who are currently on enzyme replacement therapy, and then the gray are people who've been on infusions but have stopped those. So it's pretty variable. You have a very good high percentage of patients who have a 2-hour infusion. Goodness, I don't know who that person is that gets getting their infusion in 30 minutes. That I've never seen, but perhaps that's Repligal, which is dosed a little bit lower than Fabrazyme. And then we have a smaller percentage of patients over here on the right-hand side whose infusions are greater than 4 hours. And you can see people who were infusing at 7.5 or 8 hours, they are no longer infusing. So it makes sense to me. That is a huge burden to have to infuse over such a long period of time. So we also asked about temporary symptom worsening between enzyme replacement therapy. So between your doses. So you infuse, technically most people are infusing every 2 weeks. How do you feel around, say, day 10? Are you feeling the same as you felt a day or two after your infusion, or are things changing a little bit as you're getting closer and closer to your next infusion date? So 51% of our respondents who were receiving enzyme replacement therapy at the time of the survey did report that they experienced temporary symptom worsening between infusions. The 4 top symptoms that they experienced were low energy or fatigue, pain in the hands and feet, general body pains, sometimes pain crises, and tingling in the hands and feet. And we'll go. I have one more slide about that, which lists all of the symptoms. Typically, these symptom occurrences occurred 1 to 4 days before the next infusion. And in addition, for those who were not on ERT, 48% of those patients also reported that they had this phenomenon occur. And then this is just a summary of all of the findings for the symptom worsening that patients experience. So I had told you the top 4, which mostly had to do with fatigue and pain, but that certainly wasn't limited to that. So, but a full 75% of patients on ERT said that they had low energy or fatigue in the days leading up to their next infusion. Okay. So then we asked those patients who were no longer on enzyme replacement therapy or any treatment, or sorry, we asked patients who were no longer on enzyme replacement therapy why they stopped. So obviously a subset of them were able to switch over to Galafold, the oral drug. So that was the top reason that we came across. The next reason for stopping ERT was lengthy infusions, infusion-related reactions, insurance issues, of course, inconvenience of pre-medication, travel issues, getting to treatments, or just generally feeling like it wasn't helping you and feeling like you were having disease progression in spite of being on therapy. And just to address the insurance issue piece, I do want families to be aware that the drug companies do have free drug programs available if you do have a gap in your insurance or some sort of issue with getting approval. So you can always work with your provider to see if you can access those programs. So I just was doing one this week for somebody. So it happens, and there are ways to hopefully keep you on your drug so you don't have a gap in treatment. All right. So what were some of our key takeaways? One of the things that I learned and wasn't really expecting was that 82% of patients really perceived that their disease was worsening in spite of some stable clinical assessments. 51% of respondents receiving ERT did experience that temporary symptom worsening between infusions. And of those, and I didn't actually talk about this in the results section, but of those patients, actually, less than half of patients informed their providers that they were experiencing this temporary symptom worsening. So, that made me think, gosh, I better be talking to my patients a little bit more and asking more specific questions about this. Because patients might feel like, well, they can't help it anyway, so why should I bother telling them? 42% of patients who were previously or currently treated with ERT were unsure or unaware of being tested for antibodies. 31% of patients who were tested for antibodies were not aware of what their test results were. So we concluded that patients with Fabry disease do continue to experience symptoms that impact their quality of life in spite of being on treatment. And of course, I think everyone here will agree that better treatments are needed. We know some are in development, and hopefully we can start to address some of those unmet needs with those new treatments. There are gaps between standard monitoring practices and patient perception of disease progression. So because of that, I think providers could foster better communication with patients about their illness, beliefs, and symptoms. Providers could also better educate patients about their monitoring tests, the tests that they're doing on their patients, and ask more questions about how your patients are feeling about their illness and how they perceive its progression. And lastly, the patient voice is very important. That's what this survey was. It gave patients a chance to tell us kind of what their experiences are. So the patient voice is important in understanding these unmet needs and should be looked at when a company or an institution is evaluating or developing new therapies. So that was a basic summary of the paper. And I would love to hear if anyone has any questions. I can stop sharing or comments.
Lisa, I have a comment.
Yes.
I think it's important to recognize that even when symptoms don't seem to be getting better, and you're still in pain, you still have bad GI problems, you're still not sweating, all of these things are happening. In my case, I always had good evidence that my heart was getting better, my kidneys were improving, and I don't think everyone has the benefit of that. So you don't realize what's happening that you don't see, as you said.
Or feel,
And
right?
yes, or feel. And so I was lucky enough to participate in some studies that were sort of pre-studies before as sort of a guinea pig, so to speak. So I could see when I started ERT that a year and a half into my ERT, I had significant reduction in the left ventricle of the heart.
Oh, wow.
But yet, so I could see those reports. But yet, you know, pain may not have changed. GI problems certainly didn't.
GI.
They changed, but it took a little longer. In fact,
Yeah.
GI problems are one of the things that did get significantly better with ERT over time. But, you know, it's hard to stay encouraged when you still have all these quality of life symptoms, even though your major organ symptoms are getting better. So I think a lot of people struggle with that. So
Yeah.
some people may quit treatment early because they think it's not working when it really is.
Yeah. And we definitely try to reiterate that with our patients as well, that um, really even just stabilizing disease and to slowing down the progression is better than not being on treatment and just letting things, get worse and worse over time. Um, I totally agree with that.
It doesn't mean your disease is still progressing. So I'm evidence. I still ended up with a heart transplant, but I think I lived a lot longer before I got there. So
Exactly.
as a 71-year-old. So
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
keep up the hope.
Lisa, I'm wondering, do you know exactly what the wording was for that question in terms of like, is your health getting better or worse? Because we do expect a certain slope on EGFR for every living person. And I'm
True.
wondering if that's almost where people's heads went. I'm sorry, in terms of like, someone's kidney function is inevitably going to decline year by year, regardless of any other
Right.
health problems like Fabry disease.
Yeah, I'd have to go back to the original
Yeah.
survey to see the exact wording of that question. I think it was more general. It wasn't like specifically like kidney related, EGFR related.
Hmm.
But yeah, we do talk about that. Like all of us are, slowly losing kidney function.
Hmm.
We do talk to our patients about that because you don't expect someone to go straight across
Right.
in terms of their kidney function. So we are all slowly declining. It's just the rate of decline
Right,
we know can be faster in individuals with Fabry disease.
right. And I don't know how many people in our community will end up with heart transplants, but I can tell you that by that time, I was on ERT for 18 years. My heart
Wow.
transplant was 5 years ago. And when I got a heart transplant, everything got better. So my kidney function, which had been at stage 3B for about 20 years, instead of going into stage 4, I went back into stage 2. And so I had
Wow.
significant improvements. My lung function had gotten below 50% function after my heart transplant, and now I'm in the normal range of lung function. So I don't go out and seek a heart transplant, but if you need one, get one because my life is better. Everything's better.
Wow.
Just
Awesome.
our prognosis with treatment is much better overall.
Okay, I think we have a question from the audience. Go ahead, Jesse, if you want to unmute yourself. There
Yeah,
you go.
thank you so much for the presentation. It seemed like there is a quite a bit of a skew towards people of higher socioeconomic status. Um, do you have any thoughts about why that might be, and uh, any plans about how uh, to garner more feedback from that population?
hmm That's a great question. So, um, you know, this survey was distributed mostly through the National Fabry Disease Foundation and the Fabry Support and Information Group. So you had to belong to those groups and be getting emails from them and advertisements from them about the survey. And then you had to, take the time to stop at your day, which, if you're working, two jobs to support yourself and everything, you might not have as much time to be joining these organizations, participating in them, and taking time out to fill out surveys. Although I believe it was a paid survey. So, I think that can be helpful, certainly in our completion rates when we do offer to give a gift card or whatever for spending your time completing a survey. I think that Casey and Jerry, you might have comments on this as well, like because it's probably equally as hard to recruit people to join the organization who maybe are not of as higher socioeconomic background or whatever, however you define that.
Yeah,
Do you
so I don't
find
think
that?
I don't think that we collected any data on social economic status, but for obvious reasons, if people don't have computers, that's going to be difficult. And the only thing we send out to everyone in our newsletter subscriber or on Facebook, and we really have no idea of who's responding, other than the data requested in the survey. So I wouldn't say it's skewed toward socioeconomic status, but it could be.
But it was for education. Like it was people, more than 50% of people who replied had
Oh, you're
a
right. Yeah, that
college
would
degree
have,
or
yeah, you're right.
higher.
You're right. Yeah.
So,
And I was kind of inferring economic status by the larger number of people who were privately insured and the relatively
oh,
low number
Mm,
of people that were on uh,
like
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Canada skews it up probably a little bit too, because they have a different system. But um, yeah, I feel like we see here in clinic because people most of the time will come and see their doctors. Um, but they don't always necessarily go out and join support organizations. And there's a subset of people that like I'm aware of who aren't necessarily coming in and seeing the doctor regularly either. Um, so, right, how do you reach those people? That is a challenge because I try hard. I'm like, hey, remember us? You're supposed to come in and be on treatment, and people just say, it's not a good time for them right now. So, in some regards, you know, they'll have to make that decision and decide when is a good time to prioritize things.
I
So,
think,
yeah, it is tough.
yeah, you know, all know this too, is that depending on your situation, it may not be what your income is or what your education is, but what your life is like. So you get two sides of people that have so many symptoms of Fabry, they don't want to do anything. And the
Right.
other
It's
side,
too
they have so
hard.
few symptoms, they have too few symptoms, they don't think it's important. And I
Yeah.
have family members on both sides of that. Um, Family members that there's about, well, now there's at least 23 people in my family, minus the five who passed away young, between 37 and 51, that on both sides of that, they either can't manage life enough to be on treatment, or they don't feel it's necessary because their symptoms aren't bad enough. And we all know that gets you in trouble because you can't see everything. You don't
Right.
feel everything. There's things going on that in your body that you don't recognize as being as bad as they are, or at least that you could fix or help fix.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much of this is just we get information that sort of hopefully helps us along the way, but there's so much
Hmm.
variability between people and situations that we're all definitely unique.
Yeah. I do feel like social media is a little bit of an equalizer, though. Like when you say you put it out on Facebook, well, most people have a phone and have social media, no matter what your background is. So I do feel like, in some regards, if people are at least liking the page and following it, then they're seeing these opportunities. So I do feel like that's at least one little bit of an equalizer.
Yeah. And on the other point of your point about the money, if there is a gift for taking the survey, some people that make enough money may not care. And some people that aren't making as much money may dive in a little bit quicker. You can turn it,
True.
you
It
can
goes both
evaluate it
ways.
so many different ways. You just don't know. But
And to
thank
your
you
point
for,
earlier, Lisa, that's why we do so many studies. You know, oh, this is so similar to something that was published a few years ago, but it's a different audience and they might have different insights. And I'm wondering if anyone on this call has any thoughts about how we, diversify people who are answering these types of surveys or coming to these kinds of meetings. If anyone wants to shout anything out, we'd love to hear it.
I have an idea. Of course, I work for industry and have on and off different companies, but have you guys, as part of these surveys, asked the companies who basically treat all peoples, whether they're, graduates of college or didn't graduate high school or have Medicaid, Medicare, any commercial insurance, they could potentially help distribute these kind of surveys. Is that even possible?
Oh, so have them distribute them to like the patients they are aware of that are on treatment. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, patients that,
The
are
consented
consented
patients.
with them. Yeah,
Yeah, because you probably have most comers, like at least
most
consented, maybe not
comers.
that started treatment, but
Plan to start
yeah,
something.
I feel like the companies would all have to work together and
They might, you never know.
yeah, good point.
well, and that's the benefit of having nonprofit organizations do it, is we send it to our entire newsletter, in our case, subscription list. That's sort of we don't have formal membership, but that's our membership. Our
Yeah.
Facebook subscriber followers and our newsletter subscription. So we have good reach, but we're always working on having better reach so that people are informed.
Any other questions from our guests today?
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Casey, and thank you for attending and your comments and questions, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.